So there we go. This is being recorded, so if you'd like to watch this again later, or maybe if someone is at a separate session and you want them to see this, that will be available to you. Don't forget that your sketch form will be filled out at the end of the day tomorrow, and you'll have until Friday, March 25th to get that sketch form in. Don't forget also about Family Feud tonight, 7 o'clock. You're gonna have a great host. It's gonna be a great time. And if you're able to, if you're not finishing up your lunch like I am, we do encourage you to be on camera so that we can all simulate the face-to-face experience as best we can. So again, Julia, I want to thank you so much for presenting today. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And yes, Tammy, so am I. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and between Julia and myself, we will do our best to get to those. Thank you so much, everybody, for being at this session. And Julia, we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you so much.
Okay. Hey, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. So is this the last session of the day for everyone? Did I get like, you know, the
one more? Nope,
okay.
We have one more. Your session, breakout session 4, we still have 5. So you got everybody feeling good after they ate lunch.
Yeah, this is the post-lunch. We got to make this, you know, as interesting as possible. So, okay. Hey, I really appreciate the invitation to present today. I'm hopeful that this will end up feeling practical and like something that feels relevant for everybody's work. So without further ado, this session is all about trying to make as meaningful as possible the state requirement of student growth goals, and particularly the local measure of the 2 measures that we're beholden to. So I would just really love first to have a sense of who's in the room with us today, so I know who I'm kind of presenting to and with. And so if you could just put in the chat who you are, what your role is, and where and why specifically you decided to attend this session. Oh. Renee, I hear you on the evaluations being the bane of your existence. Okay, awesome. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. All right. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, everybody. So, you know, like she shared in the intro, I'm Julia McBride. I'm the principal at Pinckney Community High School in Southeast Michigan. Prior to this role, I worked for the national nonprofit called New Tech Network, which supports schools around public schools largely across the country in essentially adopting the New Tech model, which uses project-based learning as its core teaching methodology and teaches the skills of collaboration, oral communication, written communication, personal agency, and knowledge and thinking, in addition to content and classes. And so, I began as a teacher in a New Tech school in Chicago before then joining that network and coaching other schools to do what I had been doing. What brought me here to Pinckney was that Pinckney has a New Tech school that started in 2010, and I was their school development coach before joining the Pinckney team. So it's been a beautiful thing to get close to home and be working in a place that does things that align right with my values. So here is where we're kind of centering this session, and that is with the reality that our state requires that student growth and assessment has 2 different measures for every teacher. One is a state measure some kind of standardized measure, and then a local assessment of some kind, which if you're at the high school level or adult level, then you probably know that it's kind of like the Wild West, because we have like the SAT or maybe nothing, and it's on us to really kind of figure out what that is. So I'm curious, once again, just in the chat, for those of you who are kind of living in the space already, what do you currently use for a local student growth assessment in your context? Or people can chime in too if you want. Mhm. Oh, what's CASA? What's CA? What's CASA? CAS? AS? Mhm.
That is one of our pre and post tests that we have available in adult education. We use either the TABE test or the CASAS test. And that is a pre-test that we give when they register, and then a post test when they hit 40 hours or more.
Got it. Okay, beautiful. All right, so it looks like the pattern here is either one of those two pre and posts or the NWEA or the MAP test, which we've actually just started piloting here in our 9th grade this year to see how it might inform instruction. So, okay, interesting. Some commonalities there. Okay. Okay, so, really what I'm going to do now is just kind of tell you the story of what we have been doing here in Pinckney, to ultimately move away from a more traditional pre and post test approach into something that is more meaningful for students, and more in line with our values about teaching and learning here at Pinckney. So here we go. I will just commence. So our vision here at Pinckney Community High School is that every single student and staff member feels connected to this place and to one another, that they are empowered to lead, and that they are prepared to do whatever it is after they leave these walls. And so when thinking about what type of local assessment might really help us move in that direction, we leaned on this research here that really the ability to read deeply and communicate effectively is one of the most important set of skills that anybody can have when they leave high school or any type of education setting to be successful in college and careers. So we really were influenced by that in our thinking in terms of preparedness for after people leave us. So what is disciplinary literacy, if you're not familiar? So it's easy, oftentimes to say, well, that's just kind of what English teachers do. And in this case, if you're not already kind of living in the world of Michigan's disciplinary literacy essentials and things like that, think of it as answers to the question of how do people in my field, what do they read? How do they have to make sense of what they have to read? And ultimately, in what ways do they have to communicate and in what formats? And let's have our kids do that. So our staff has been wrestling with that set of questions for the last 4.5 years, of course, with just slight interruptions due to the pandemic. But so, ultimately wrestling with how can we have kids do what people in our disciplinary fields have to do in careers through the tasks that we assign. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but I'm going to close out a couple things so I can see it better. But just to give a little painting of the picture of how we've arrived to where we are today, So 5 years ago, in the 2017-18 school year, we ultimately committed to every single teacher is going to come up with 2 tasks that answers those questions of how can I have kids do what people in my field do in terms of how they communicate. You're going to deploy one by December and one by May. And in December or January, as a staff, we're all going to look at the writing samples that have been produced, and ultimately look for patterns of strengths in our students' communication and where are we seeing opportunities for improvement. And then that's what has ultimately influenced what then drove our scaffolding focus for the second round of these disciplinary literacy tasks. And so you'll see that in year 1, in December, we looked at the first round of student writing, and largely across content areas, people said, we need to help our kids really make a clear claim and stick to it as they proceed in their written piece. And so that's what we focused on in our scaffolding for the second semester. The following year, when we did this exact same cycle again, it was, okay, so they're getting better at making a claim, but then really helping them get more organized in their ability to support that claim with strong evidence supported by sound reasoning of why that evidence supports the claim. And so this was a 3-year process that we committed a lot of our professional development time to as a staff. So here in this high school, we have the students have early release Fridays, and then we devote an hour after that, or 70 minutes or so, to staff meetings and staff professional development, which is nice because it allows this ongoing process together for us to be working on something specific. So this was something that, across this process, we looked at exemplar models of these tasks. We had a local panel of professionals, in Pinckney, we're nearby Dexter and Ann Arbor, Brighton. And so we had some folks from Google in Ann Arbor, a local physical therapy office, a researcher come in and essentially talk about in what ways do I have to communicate with people information in my careers so that we could have really relevant examples of, what we need to prepare our kids to be able to do. And then that informed task design and things like that. So now fast forward to this being year 5. And again, there's a lot on this slide, but we have now just committed to these tasks are our student growth goal measure. And so for a couple of years, for me as the administrator, I encouraged teachers to go this direction with their student growth goal. A lot of people were just using pre and post tests, maybe even just around a unit or something like that. In the year, it was simple because you could just Scantron it. And obviously a kid was not going to know a lot about something they'd never learned before. And so it was a sure thing in a lot of respects, but it just wasn't really very meaningful in terms of the missed opportunities, in my opinion. But while we were working on this for 3 years, I just took advantage of opportunities with teachers who were kind of really picking up on this effort and said, why don't you just make it your student growth goal and compare the students' writing from the first to the second task, and set a specific measure of a goal you want to achieve in terms of how well they improve. And so what we did over this 5-year process is we chose a common rubric that we could all use, and that was the SAT essay rubric. We leaned on, and we essentially took out a couple very specific elements from that rubric that aligned with gaps we were seeing in our student writing that we wanted to prioritize. And we made, oops, hold on. I'm going to go ahead here. So this is what the rubric looks like. Very simple. It's language pulled right from the SAT writing rubric. And we've just been driving home this notion of making a claim supported by sound evidence and reasoning. and figuring out, making sense of what does it look like? What does that type of set of skills look like in your content area? So the way the language goes is I've actually drafted this language myself as the administrator and given it to staff the last 2 years, which last year, especially with, being such a wild year, the first year of the pandemic, anything we could do to just clear the path for teachers to be focusing on teaching and connecting with kids, we did. And so they appreciated just being provided the language for this, and then they could make it their own based on the tasks that they designed that were relevant to their discipline. So for us, the theory of action here is that the more that we collectively focus on this skill of making a claim supported by evidence and reasoning in all of the ways of our disciplines, then naturally kids are going to do better and better on external measures like the SAT. So I'm really not a big test prep fan, but I do believe that there are things that you can do that are going to naturally lend themselves to better outcomes on those standardized tests. And this is one of them. So then, our second student growth goal as a building that we share a commitment to is our students' outcomes on the evidence-based reading and writing portion of the SAT. Because if we do a really bang up job on those disciplinary literacy tasks, then naturally this outcome is just going to occur. And it has so far, 4 years running, in fact, in terms of what we've chosen to do is say our kids are going to do as well or better than their demographically similar peers in the state of Michigan on evidence-based reading and writing in the SAT. So again, we provided a common rubric to just clear the path for staff to focus on quality tasks. You've got this common tool, but we also open the door to say, this might not be the most relevant scoring tool for you. So for example, my AP English teacher said, yes, can I just use the AP rubric? Well, yeah, because that's what you're going to be, that's what you're prepping your kids for anyways. Same goes for like my AP Calculus teacher. He's using the AP Calc free response rubric, things like that. So flexibility there, but the same rubric needs to be used between the two tasks. One of my teachers then created a data tracker template, very simple, nice and color coded. The formulas are already embedded in there, so it just kind of does it for you. And so this then has been shared as a template for teachers to consider using to really just simplify the process and to focus on the quality of the task. So some examples of like, what on earth does this look like? And so here are some examples across a variety of the content areas in our building. So when it comes to math, a lot of it has been about, okay, defend your answer using accurate math terminology. How do you know your answer is correct? Describe the process that you went through to solve it in written form using the correct vocabulary to support. Biology or things like science, you hear our teachers talking a lot about there's no opinions in science, there's only facts, there's no fluff, just get to the point. And so really getting nuanced about what's different about science writing compared to English writing. So you see a lot of the lab report structure, you see taking positions like this biology task. So we have a CTE or Career Tech Ed program here in the building. And, for them, it's email etiquette. It is appropriate diagrams to make a claim about something. It's work orders in the auto shop. It is pitches in the marketing class, things like that. In our world language department, they've recognized that when it comes to world language or foreign language, they're not going to be writing a 4 or 5 page essay. It's going to be shorter in scope and very specific to the skills and vocabulary that they've been learning. So, so at some of the outcomes of this, kind of a range of impacts so far. Ultimately, we have met our external measure goal every year that we've been working on this. In fact, the first couple years, our students made more progress than the growth standard, or more progress than their demographically similar peers on the SAT. And we didn't do any SAT prep per se. We just did this. And, you know, honestly, with the way the last year and a half has gone, I consider it quite an accomplishment that we exceeded our county and state peers on the most recent SAT as well in evidence-based reading and writing. And I really honestly attribute it to this particular focus of ours. So then when you look at local community colleges with entrance exams, our students tend to stand out when it comes to the written element. And you know, local test prep tutors, you know, they notice that there's something special about the writing of our Pinckney kids. And then really having that panel of local professionals in was very validating, because they said this is exactly the kind of thing that people are going to have to do when they try to get jobs. So good to be practicing now. So really, I would love to open the floor to any questions, but then also carve time for some processing before people share any new thinking that has come up for you. So any questions before some think time?
I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, do you have samples of, I saw that the prompts, do you have samples of any kind of worksheets or graphic organizers you use? And maybe even some sample essays that your students have written?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I have, I should have included that. I do have a common graphic organizer that staff created, that teachers created, and then have kind of adapted based on their content area, but that really provides prompts and sentence stems for making a claim supported by evidence and reasoning, to really define what those things are and give examples of how to begin to frame the language of those pieces. So I would be more than happy to share that.
And would that be all part of like maybe your lesson planning materials? Is that where you would be taking those from? Because I find this is such an interesting topic, and trying to use improvements in their writing skills to also then spill over into improvements in their reading skills, which is obviously what you've been finding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and that we most of our staff has been trained in reading apprenticeship over the years, and so one thing that this raised for staff is, hey, we actually have a skill set or a toolkit that we can lean on that helps students read more critically in order to be able to then take that information and create something that leans on evidence from their reading. So yes, this is so those, yeah, the graphic organizer and leaning on reading apprenticeship strategies has all things that have emerged out of how do we help our kids get better at this specific skill we're seeing a gap in.
And so would that be something that you might be able to, I mean, how would we get some of that information from you, do you think would be the best way?
Oh boy. Well, what I can do is if we give people a little bit of work time or just processing time, I could go in and find a couple things that I could share just right here in the chat. And then I do believe I need to be sharing some materials after the session too, which
Yes.
I can share
Yep, you
those
will,
as a
and you will
part of
be
that.
sharing those with Patrick, and Patrick can make all of
Okay.
those materials available to everyone here right after. We'll be getting follow-up emails.
Perfect.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm, mhm. Any other questions before maybe just 10 minutes of processing time?
Not a question, but I would just like to share my appreciation that I saw prompts for several different subject areas. When our students come in, sometimes they only need a couple of specific classes to finish their diploma. And the thought of having to make them, like when we do, they have to do their CASAs pre and post test, they might not even be doing reading or math. They might be here to finish a science class or a social studies class. So it was great to see that you've thought of that and have prompts for different subject areas so that we could use those to help with the teacher evaluation instead of it always being focused on their pre and post test scores that really don't apply to every student we serve. So thank you for having all those different subject areas.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go with 5 or 10 minutes of just think time. And while that's happening, I'm going to find a couple things, a couple artifacts that I can share that can then kind of extend your thinking about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Julia. And we can definitely start to reflect on what we see on the screen. I know for myself, I used to think there was only one way to do evaluations and we really shouldn't deviate from the plan. So I love to see options here. So we will go into think tank mode. Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask for any new thinking here in about 1 minute. I'm going to share one more thing here in the chat, which is a set of task templates. Big fan of the Literacy Design Collaborative out of Stanford, and have leaned on that a lot in my support of teachers and their task design. Okay. Well, I just littered the chat with a variety of resources that hopefully helps bring this effort a little bit more to life. The last link is to a reading apprenticeship strategies reference guide. So one of the more, right before we all kind of got stuck at home, in March 2020, a big takeaway, as somebody mentioned, as important here just a little bit ago, is that our kids, really, if we're going to expect them to craft a quality piece of written work that uses evidence, then we need to make sure that we're doing our part in developing their confidence in reading critically. And so getting back into our toolkit of the strategies that build students' ability to do that, was important. And so that last link is one thing that we pulled back into our repertoire. So I'm curious, I guess I would just open to the floor to either people's reflections of, what you used to think about the local student growth assessment and what you're thinking about now, or any kind of new ideas you have brewing that is relevant to your particular context. And you can either share in the chat or just chime in.
And just a reminder to everyone, these resources that are amazing and shared in the chat will also be shared with Patrick, and we'll make sure we make all of that available to you as well. So I don't know if you guys were like me and I was quick saving all those links and emailing to myself, even though I know that Patrick's going to send them to me. So So I can ask, we use Standards for Success is our program that we use in Romulus to measure, to do our evaluations. Is there a specific program like the Danielson or Standards for Success? What do you use out in Pinckney? And forgive me if that's already been mentioned.
Oh, no, I didn't mention that. So we use the 5D evaluation system. So it's the 5 dimensions of teaching and learning, which was created by the Center for Ed Leadership out of the University of Washington. And so, you know, there's 6 different domains, and there's a whole domain around curriculum and pedagogy that really gets at discipline specific tasks. So this effort has been nicely aligned to what teachers are expected to do anyways, as a part of our evaluation system.
How did you handle evaluations when we were virtual? So I run a virtual alternative school in Romulus. So our students, you know, it's more challenging to do an evaluation and to observe your teacher when they're using Edgenuity. So can you offer any insights? Yeah. Sure. So can you offer any insights as to how you might, because I think I'm not the only program here that uses Edgenuity, yet we still are expected to do an evaluation like our other K through 12 traditional face-to-face partners. So can you offer any advice to a program like me on how we might make those virtual evaluations a bit more meaningful?
Really interesting question. I guess I would have to ask, what is the teacher's role, or what is that person's role in the student's engagement with Edgenuity?
So they're mentor teachers, right? So that's what we struggle with, those 2 terms. I shouldn't say struggle. Our 2 terms are, you know, teacher of record and then mentor teacher. So the way that our program is structured is that one teacher would work with a group of students through all of those classes and help mentor them throughout all of those classes. And if there's a specific subject question that they may not be able to answer, we have teachers of record in those certified areas in the high school that we can work with. But I have to be honest and say my 2 teachers are pretty brilliant, so they're able to work through that. But Julia, I'm sure you're privy to that as well. This is a law that might be changing this year where we cannot have really mentor teachers in each of those classes, that we need to have more teachers of record. So long answer, longer, my teachers act as more mentors. So they might have a group of students that they look at all 6 of those classes with. And it just makes the evaluation process tricky with these standards, because I see how they interact with their students. I can see through the text and the emails that are sent, but it just doesn't really align with what we do, with what the rest of the district does, and it can make it tricky.
Yeah. And so you're probably getting a lot of, this part of the rubric doesn't apply to me in
100%.
And
you know, we try to go, okay, instead of thinking of it this way, let's think of it this way. So it's just it's very limited with what we can do, and we do our very best. We like goal setting, we're big with that, but it can be challenging to make, and the same with adult education and with ESL population, it can be difficult to make that cookie cutter evaluation work for our unique circumstances.
Yeah, well, I can't pretend to be an expert in that, but I can certainly take a stab at things that may be similar. So last year, while we were in person for much of the year in Pinckney, we actually leaned on Michigan Virtual's LMS called Brightspace, and even kind of cherry picked some of their content, their courses, to support our teachers' instruction, with the theory that if and when we have to go remote overnight, if you will, we'll be ready, because it'll just be, you know, we're leaning on the experts who already do this virtual work. So for, you know, I guess for me, what I looked for was what's the infrastructure or the skeleton that teachers built around the already existing course to make it as accessible as possible for students, to make expectations as clear and simple and accessible as possible, What systems did they design to help track student progress and to ensure students knew where they were at and what they needed to do next? So essentially, you know, what is the system you've wrapped around this already existing package of learning that better ensures student success? I guess is a lens. Now, we also had our teachers engaging in live lessons with our students during those remote times, and so I did virtual, you know, observations of that. So.
And that's a lot easier when you have synchronous instruction, you know, that we can just pop into the Google Meets and things like that, the classroom. So thank you, though. That definitely, you know, I just have to be honest. When I was hired as a director 2 years ago, evaluations were the biggest thing that gave me anxiety because I was never evaluated. So they weren't a part of our day-to-day life. So I think just to take away some of the negative connotations in my own mind that are affiliated with an evaluation and help to make them more meaningful for my staff. So I appreciate this. I definitely intend on doing more follow-up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's got me wondering a little bit about, so I spent a very short period of time working with Michigan Virtual, specifically supporting mentors of online learners. And you know, it almost makes me wonder whether somebody in that mentor role shouldn't have a different evaluation tool.
I think it just seems, you know, it's hard to evaluate everyone based on the same measures. So, and I have very, very valuable teachers. I couldn't do a thing without them, and they're great at what they do. It's just this specific tool doesn't really allow me to express to the board and to our superintendent what all it is they're doing. So, and it's been a topic of conversation, but I think evaluation tools, I don't think this is it's tricky. So I really do appreciate this.
Absolutely.
Were there any other questions from anyone out there about evaluations? Maybe just your thoughts on them and how you might like to be evaluated, or any questions you might have. And again, all those amazing resources that were made available in the chat box will soon be made available to Patrick, and he will make them available to us. Okay. Well, Julia, if it's okay with you, I say we can let everybody maybe out 10 minutes early, get an extra break. We do have one more group of sessions coming up this afternoon. You can do your MERS mid-year review with yours truly. You could do student advocacy. We also have helping refugees and the integration of digital literacy in adult education programs. So 4 really good sessions. Again, I think this has just been a great spring conference. This has been a very thought-provoking presentation. Julia, thank you so much. Everybody, we hope to see you for round 5 of breakout sessions. And then again, have to do my plug for Family Feud. Hope to see you soon, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Julia. Bye-bye.
See ya.